guided for us. When they selected me for Minister of Health, or Secretary of Health as we call it here, it came at a time when there was transition in government. The previous president had been ousted as a result of corruption charges. A new president had stepped in to serve the balance of that term. The new president had come in on a broad support from political alliance. She convened a search committee, and the search committee involved people from that whole spectrum of the alliance, including the private sector, the public sector, the church, the government bureaucracy, and so on and so forth. And so I know when they told me that amongst the candidates, they selected me because if you look at it from a political perspective, one, the government bureaucracy backed me up because I had a good reputation having worked with the government bureaucracy. It could have been different. If I had not a good reputation in the government bureaucracy, that would have been the kiss of death. Okay? So I had that. I had support from the private sector, particularly from the NGO sector, because I worked in Mindanao in an NGO situation. I had support from the private sector. I had, by the time, I was working in a pharma company, and I had worked for 4 years in the private sector. And so I knew somewhat about the private sector, the dynamics of pharmaceuticals, and so on and so forth. And I had support of the church. I mean, they thought that, I was somebody that was trustworthy. The president didn't know me when she appointed me. She looked at my CV, and when she called me for a meeting, I thought that was the interview. And then as I walked in, and she walked into the room, she said, your reputation's preceded you. I've signed your appointment. Wow.
Sir, in all of these positions you've filled in, has there been like feeling of fear or reluctance in you to accept this leadership position?
Well, there's always a feeling of foreboding. You always thoughts always crop up. Is this the right job? Are you up for this? Particularly if it's new territory. I think what somehow protects you is that sense of naivete. That you don't really know all the pitfalls, all the difficulties down the road. You just have this sense that, well, it's a job. I think I have the skills to handle it. And you just move forward. Because I think that if you knew everything that was going to come down the road, you'd probably just get paralyzed from fear and say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be subjected to that. And you back off. So there is a benefit to being somehow in the dark about what you're going to face in the future. And then what is more prominent is just your desire to come in and serve. And I guess in my case, it's just moving into it wholeheartedly and always have the sense that, well, if it doesn't work out, then you can always exit.
Okay, I read your article on leadership. Then there's this saying that you get a great distinction between management and leadership. So because we were in an MBA class, then we strongly emphasize the difference. But in your experiences, do you think like one precedes the other, or like leadership is management is a prerequisite to leadership? What do you think about that?
I don't think there are any hard and fast rules. It depends on how the situation evolves and what opportunities come up. I was just telling the students that if you read the article, it says usually you become a manager because you're put in a management position, okay? But you can become a leader even without a position. And I tell them that really, the advice that I give there is that seek leadership, not the leadership position. And if you look at the framework that's there that we use, which is the donut, if you look at that donut, that's a very effective summary, that framework. The hole in the donut are really the personal attributes of a leader, which begins with self-belief, self-management, self-awareness, personal integrity, and a constant desire for improvement. That is the core of a leader, and therefore, for anyone, you are first a leader of yourself. You are, if you are to lead anyone, you have to lead yourself. And so that's why personal integrity is so important. Because then, if you then have those qualities and can lead yourself, you can manage yourself. You're just the simple things of, being punctual at meetings, managing yourself, not, being courteous, not being dishonest. All of those are the qualities of a leader, leading yourself. And eventually, if those personal qualities are embedded in you, then the other skills you can learn, and you can look at the 10 other skills there from there's such noble and high flow, from seizing the future, to inspiring others. These are all skills, and many of them are social skills. Some of them are political skills. But you can imagine somebody with political skills but doesn't have the personal qualities. Are basically dishonest. And then you see where the leader takes the lead. And as I said, it's that dynamic of the leader and the follower which actually makes for leadership. In a sense, there's no leader without a follower. And if you're only one, can you be a leader? I say yes. You lead yourself. In MBA, you talk about organizations, therefore you always put it within the framework of the leader and the led and the organization that you have. But I think the starting point of all of that is really the leader and the self.
And in your experiences, because you've moved from public sector to the private sector, did you see a change or a shift in leadership styles that you had to take into? Did you have to become more authoritative at the time? And so is it more, did you have a chance to experiment with different leadership styles throughout your experience?
Yeah, because the cultures of the organization vary. For example, although I think there are certain fundamentals, because I think particularly in our generation, while some people want to be directed, okay, even the manner of directorship, or you might say more authoritative guidance, is better if it's blended with consultation. So I think what I'm saying is, in the public sector, for example, the culture of the Department of Health, it's in a sense it's a military culture. It's a bureaucratic culture. You move through what they call orders. There are department orders, there are travel orders, and it's a bureaucracy. It's a hierarchy. Okay, and you have to be very clear there. And people there want you to give them an order. This is what you do. Okay? But even as you are expected to do that, the subtext is, let me discuss it first. Can we understand the rationale behind the order? And this is what the challenge is, particularly in a huge bureaucracy where you have thousands of people. You have different managers and you have the followers. How do you manage the process? And I say manage okay, the process. But actually, how do you lead the process also of ensuring that things get done and the mandate of the organization gets fulfilled? So when I read, for example, the literature on different styles, okay, the authoritarian, that's really looking at it sort of in a very sterile way, as if that was only one style, that one exercise. But really, in reality, it flows. You could be authoritarian one day because that's what needs to happen, particularly if it's a crisis, and you say, do it. Or you could be more consultative and participatory another day, where it's not clear yet what you want to achieve. You're trying to evolve consensus, and you get people to come out and give their opinion. So, two different styles. You could be doing the same style within the same organization on a different day. So the answer to your question is yes. You evolve your your style depending on the context. But of course, there may be a fundamental trait, you might say, for particular individuals. Okay? And that then is a function of that individual, his personality, and his character.
Are there any specific situations that you would have faced where your leadership style really came out, or you were put out of skin for doing something that you would have faced? For example, you have a situation and your leadership is not really, your style is not being effective in that particular situation. Did you have to do something different to make sure you resolve that particular situation?
Well, I guess the way I'd answer that is that I have been faced with situations that I was not comfortable with, or did not have many opportunities to face. For example, dealing with congressmen and senators, dealing with the commission and appointments. How do you deal with that? You're the minister, you're the secretary of health, and you have to go through this process of being appointed by a 20-man commission. Okay, how do you deal with that? Do you just say, well, I step back and wait for them to appoint me? Okay, but you know that the process is not that. There's a lot of horse trading in the middle, because some of the senators or congressmen want favors. So there's a quid pro quo. It's very transactional. So how do you deal with that? I'm the type of person that wants to say, this is the goal, this is the vision, let's get together and do it. Okay, that's as the article says. That's more transformational approach. But there's the other side of it where, okay, what do I get out of doing it your way and the transaction? And so, these are instances where I've had to, you might say, behave differently. So, for example, set an appointment and then talk to the senator if or ask his support. That sort of thing. Ask the support in a way that you don't, you just come out above board and say, will you support my the appointment? And that's where I would stop, because some people might say, well, and as a result of your support.
Sir, what kind of leaders are most difficult to deal with?
What kind of...
Who are the leaders do you find that are difficult to deal with? I mean, there's government, and then there's the private sector, there's the Catholic, there's like religious sector. So who among this have always been challenging?
Well, I think the most challenging to deal with are people that move from certain Um, well, well, first of all, when you say leaders, the most difficult people that I might have to deal with are people with hidden agendas. Okay,
Sir, but
they're
how do you-
leaders because they may be heads of organizations or head of things, but if they have personal agendas that you're not seeing, and you seem to be operating on a premise that you have a common goal, but in fact there are hidden agendas to achieving that common goal. Like, I'm simplifying, but the common goal is to, let's say, improve a hospital. Okay, but the hidden agenda is, I'll improve the hospital, but I need to get a cut from procurements there.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's difficult, particularly if you're not willing to compromise on the integrity and acquiesce to that request. Okay, so in a situation political situation where, for example, you need to survive. You need to survive because that's the nature of the job. How are you able to balance that without selling your soul?
We're also just curious, what are the major difference when it comes to leading people in the local setting as compared to leading people in the international context, based on your experience?
Well, people are the same everywhere, but I think the main difference is maybe the cultural differences. Some cultures are more they're more subdued. They're more nonverbal. There's some cultures that are more expressive, more straight to the point, more black and white, and therefore being able to move in those cultural circles can be challenging. But it's also the same here. But generally, the cultural differences may be less pronounced. Okay? But for example, African, North American, Asian, and you have a mix of that in an international environment. So that would be a challenge. For example, a person who's multinational CEO working in a country. Okay, all of those things. And for example, you could have, and I think you know this, you could have a North American, Northern European company that comes here. They have very, very clear procedures for how they deal with governments. And then if you have a government that, they're just going to make things move if there are bribes.
Yes.
Then it throws off your budget.
Yeah. Wait. Also, from your article, you have this distinction between can leaders be taught or are they born? Because this has also been a major argument in our discussions in class. Because there are some leaders who kind of insinuate that leaders are born instead of, because they have this certain genetic trait. And yeah, you also kind of bring light to that. But I think you're more on that leaders can be taught, and I think that's also one of the things that this school is particular with the public administration courses.
Yeah. Well, I think what the literature is saying is that leaders, you can taught. Leadership can be learned, and leadership can be taught. And having said that, well, there are leaders who may genetically have been born to a tradition of leadership, and those who are not. But in the end, both of them can become leaders.
It's just acquiring certain skills and attributes.
Yeah, it's acquiring those skills and attributes, and as I said, evolving the types of personal qualities and the types of competencies that will make one effective.
So you've always had this vision of sort of like changing the world and changing the landscape of society. What was the trigger for this in your in growing up? What was it about your past that made you want to change things? Because there are other people who are open to the events that are happening around them, and then it was just okay for them to sit back and just see what's going to happen. But in your case, it was
Driven
it's
by
like you were
ambition.
driven by something.
Yeah.
What was it that you think was driving you to attain this vision? Was it-
That's a difficult question, and depending on where you sit, you know, you could give a lot of answers that are, how would you call it, unverifiable. Okay. For example, as a Catholic, you know, we would believe that the Holy Spirit moves and guides you. Okay. I probably believe that much more now. Okay. But having said that, maybe I would say that maybe the context of where I grew up and when I grew up inculcated that, and teachers in grade school. But you know, I know that people within my generation grew up with that. So it's a combination of a lot of things. I would simply say, and if you were asking me to point a finger on what particular
What was
event
it? Yeah,
or a
the-
particular person,
No.
no. I think you had a general direction, and I think in the end it boils down to just certain fundamental questions, certain fundamental existential questions, like you know, what's the meaning of your life? You know, if for example, and you know they use this time and again, but if you were faced at the end of your life and you know you were asked, what did you do with it? Then I guess that was a driving force. Another was just wanting to be able to fulfill one's potential, whatever that potential was. But even that is also quite abstract. The other is just wanting to belong, be part of something bigger than yourself. And it happened to be the passion was public health. You know, the passion could be something else. You know. The passion could be, like Henry C., it was what? Building malls. You know, and getting fabulously rich. Because there are some people that is their passion. And I guess in my case, the passion was, you know, serve, but eventually it boiled down to medicine and public health. And so that was the area that I operated in for most of my career. But understanding that that was only one area that needed to interact with a lot of other areas. And you shouldn't just isolate that area in itself.
So you were.
I don't think I answered your question, but you know,
But I think
that's
I
a very because
Because there's some leaders, they go like, we were poor before, that's why now I know that I want this. I didn't have this before. So, I guess, I
In
don't
my
get the
case,
impression
it was
that you
not
were
like that,
thrown
no.
into an event wherein you
Yeah.
felt that you were marginalized or you were ill, that you wanted
no catastrophic or cataclysmic events like that. I think in a sense, mine was, well, we weren't poor, but we weren't rich. And I personally didn't feel any deprivation. Okay? But I think there was empathy for people that weren't, you know, that were deprived. And so that empathy with the poor and the suffering resonated very much with me.
Sir, do you think if you continued your management, your business course in the beginning and did not pursue medical school, do you think you would have this same, you would be in this position right now?
Well, that's a good
In terms
question.
of leadership. I think,
Well, I really don't know. If I had pursued the business, well, because in my case,
public.
Because when I examine my own values, material wealth is not a big driver. You know, it's not a big driver. That's why I'm a poor businessman because I'm not gonna go for the profit. I mean, that's just not me. Okay, but it's not saying that, you know,
It doesn't matter.
I don't want the money. I mean, the money is fine because the money allows you to do things that you want to do. Okay, but it's not that drives me. What drives me more are, you might say, let's say, breaking new ground in knowledge. Okay, doing a research that actually contributes to better health. That's what drives me. Managing a project that makes people who are suffering not suffer as much. Those are the things that actually make me excited.
So in terms of managing people, what do you think are the biggest challenges that you face? As a manager now instead. As a manager, but you took on a leadership, you resolved it in a leadership way.
I think the biggest challenge is really getting people on the same page and buying into
To
organizational, collective, corporate goals. That's one, and doing that in a way where you also take care of a lot of their mundane needs. Because, you know, we tend to assume that, I mean, there are people here that are working at their minimum wage and so on and so forth. You know, how do you arrive at organizational goals and have everyone in the organization also have a chance to improve themselves constantly? For example, when we recruit students here, we provide scholarships. You know, and for us, that's an investment in the future. It's a strain on the budget. We have to fundraise, but you never know. You know, so many scholars. I say these are the people you'll never know. They're going to change the world because of this scholarship, because of this opportunity. And so you just do that. You're not sure how it's going to impact, but you have a sense that it will.
So you enter different organizations, but then it's inevitable that you also have to leave them. In terms of succession, like the people who would eventually take over your role, what qualities do you think, do you look for? Are these the people who share the same vision as you? Or are these the people who are a bit more radical and try to see things different from what you've done so far?
Well, I always say that in the end, you try to work yourself out of a job. Now, preparing the way for the next person, all you can do is control the processes so that transition happens. Actually, anointing and cherry picking somebody for that position, that's a bit more difficult. You might, but you know, the person might, with the image that you have, who's best to follow you may not be available. And that's why you have headhunters who try to find that when a position becomes vacant. So I can only say that, particularly in Department of Health, I made sure that the transition to the next secretary was smooth, because I had seen how transitions had brought havoc on the organization. You know, the vacuum at the leadership post, what happens to people, the uncertainty, how then there's an excuse for non-performance for people who don't want to work, and it creates havoc. So create a transition that ensures that somebody gets in there. And in my case, the person who had been identified by the president was already available. So worked with him to ensure that transition was smooth. In other instances, there may not be a person identified. And maybe the best thing is really for you to leave so that the management that has latitude and leeway to find that person.
In terms of like your experiences as a leader, have you identified like, because leadership is like in a sense motivating people, so have you seen any best practices that work effectively or like that work in any situation, something like a special leadership tactic or recipe in motivating people?
Well, I guess the way I'd answer that question is to think back and look at my own bosses. You know, not just bosses, but even professors, teachers. Because you might say a teacher is a leader,
Yes.
in a sense, because that teacher models certain values, certain characteristics that students actually begin to emulate, sometimes without knowing that they're already copying. Okay, so I think one, the leaders or the mentors who were able to show you things that you weren't seeing. Meaning to say, you as a leader being able to provide an accurate mirror to somebody who's up and coming. A mirror in the sense that you give honest feedback, you give the type of advice that he or she can consider without forcing or patronizing. Those are the type of leaders that one would, I would appreciate. Leaders who were simply supportive, who you felt were genuinely caring for you, even if they didn't particularly do anything, but maybe just talk with you and have a honest conversation with you. These were leaders that I would also hold that. And then, of course, there were those that would propound a vision that one might want to buy into, one might want to be part of. So, a whole range of leaders, which actually gives you a sense that as a leader for an organization or for a group of people, the leader has multiple functions. It's not just providing the vision, but you have to provide the support, you have to provide the sense of caring, you have to provide the procedures and the processes so that things can happen, and so on and so forth. So, as you can see, what's in the literature can be very, very simplistic.
Yes.
Okay, and because they're written up as characteristics and all of that, but all the time it's the context. It's where is this being applied? And what is the situation at that historical time? That's really what makes it very, very interesting.
So do you ever get tired or stressed?
Of course.
From being a leader? And then do you look forward to the day we're in, okay, I don't have to think of other people now. It's time for me to take a rest and relax. Do you see yourself?
I've actually fantasized along that line, and then I say, maybe I can do that, but I'd be bored after 2 days. So I think in the end, I'll probably continue to be active till I can't be active anymore.
Sir, in managing your stress level, what other activities do you do?
Oh, I swim about 1.2 kilometers every other day.
Do you think, sir, that's important for
Yeah,
all
yeah.
for
Yeah. I wasn't able to do that as often, but now that I do it, I think it's important. So I do that. I play the piano. So really mainly to entertain myself. I set goals like because I play the piano, but I'm not really a musician. You know, somebody that can accompany the chords. But I set that as imaginary goals. You know, that oh, maybe someday you'll be good enough to play jazz piano. You know? So I do that. I read a lot. I follow the sports. And even try to learn from what I read in the papers, given that most of the things are maybe sensationalized or hyped up, and there's always an inside story. You always learn something from what people say in the op-ed pages, and what developments occur. Because things happen, they happen all the time, and because the world is so interconnected, there are things that happen in other parts of the world that, in a sense, influence your thinking here, even if it's miles away, and influence the thinking of many other people here. Sure.
You've been in the public eye for so long. How do you draw the line? Because there are probably articles written about you that are both positive and negative. How do you draw the line and say, wait, this might be real, then I might have to look at myself and try to improve myself, instead like, this is just crap and and the sensationalized news. So where do you draw the line between reassessing yourself and trying to change yourself for the better versus just looking at it and identifying that, oh, it's not real, I don't have to do or change?
Well, maybe the broader way of answering that is, how to react to criticism and compliments that may be publicly aired or privately given. For me, criticism, particularly if well-meaning, even if difficult, is actually welcome, because it challenges you, as you said, to rethink, and it boils down to rethink whether you're effective in what you're doing and effective in what you want to accomplish. So, for example, my wife can be one of my harshest critics. It tells you, because she knows me so well and understands these things. So when those come, I say, well, thanks for telling me. Maybe I didn't do things as well, or I didn't communicate as well, and so on and so forth.
So in terms of compliments, because you're like you're in a higher position, and people tend to give you, oh, you're so good at this, you're probably the best in this area. So do you instantly believe them, or do you
Well,
say,
those things are always nice to hear, but I think in my case, you just take it for what it is. Well, if they give you a compliment, well, thank you. If they meant the compliment, thank you. If they didn't mean the compliment, thank you. Sometimes you don't know. Just accept it.
Any leadership decisions that you regret having taken in your career so far? Any tricky situation you thought you would have done something differently?
Well, I think you only regret something that you did because the outcome was something that
You didn't expect.
you weren't happy about, or was not beneficial to as many people as you would have wanted. In my case, I don't second guess myself. I just say, well, that's how it was. I made a decision then and there. These were the facts at my disposal. I'm not going to beat myself in the back because I didn't know this and I wasn't told this.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just the way it is. And you just try to learn from that.
Any tips? Any tips?
Yeah,
for aspiring leaders
like us.
Well, as I said, the three things that I mentioned in the article was really well, I guess develop your core, okay, develop the donut.
Yeah.
And that's what I was telling the freshman students. You know, you've come here and you're listening to somebody who's lived ahead of you 38 plus years, 40 years. Okay, so when somebody that far ahead of you speaks, they're speaking retrospectively. You have to live your life forward. Okay, so in living your life forward, you can only do it one day at a time. And so develop your inner core. If you're not confident in yourself now, some of them are saying, are we going to make it through med school?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the nature of the game. You know, it's you're entering. Of course, you may not have the self-belief that other people might have 10 years down the road. But you can develop that self-belief if you work hard and if you continue to say and to have faith that this is what you want to do. So it's developing your inner core, the self-belief, the self-awareness. Meaning to say to pursue the journey. I mean, be willing to set off and pursue the journey and want to do that journey. I think the biggest tragedy is people who set off on the journey, they're not sure whether they want to go off on that journey in the first place. And that's the biggest tragedy, wherever that journey may lead them, whether it's being the head of, it's like people that might inherit things, you know. And somehow I think this is the handicap of people that may have been born rich or been born poor also, but born rich and said, you know, you are now the scion of this multi-billion-dollar industry and you have to step into it. Some people say, fine, you know, great, I'd love to do that. But some people might say, my father built that. That's not how I want to live my life. So it then goes back to your question, from where does the spirit for anything come from? It's an existential question that everybody has to answer for themselves. You won't find it in the textbook.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the time.